Welcome back. We're here to preview Sunday afternoon's Premier League match between Swansea and Manchester City. That will start with Swansea. Last time out on Monday night, they go to Arsenal in a really impressive 1-0 win.
Yeah, I think it was a definition of a smash and grab win, wasn't it? You know, to go to the Emirates. Arsenal obviously in great form, but obviously getting beat there was their first defeat in 11 as well. Swansea to inflict that on them was obviously a massive thing for them. And the game itself, you know, the first half was not great in terms of, you know, action. I think it was one of the poorest halves of the season actually overall. You know, there wasn't too much going on. Arsenal quickened the pace in the second half as you expect and really pushing forward. Swansea had to rely on their goalkeeper Fabianski, obviously going back to the Emirates, who he had a difficult spell at Arsenal, didn't he? Was never really number one. Made some really good saves. I remember one from Walcott and Sanchez, both had really good chances, and Fabianski managed to make decent saves. And then the goal itself was typical breakaway. You know, Montero out wide has done decent this season. I think it was Barrow who came on the right, sort of whipped it in. It ended up on the left with Montero, flicks it back in, and Gomes heads it in. Obviously, it was interesting to see the way that Ospina obviously looked like he was going to save it, and then obviously the watch went off to say that it was over the line, and the goal was given. In normal play, you know, he didn't look over the line at all. You know, you look at it, it looked like it was quite comfortably, but obviously that shows that technology, it has been a really good thing. It was far too late to be introduced. Obviously, it is introduced now. The fact that Arsenal, you know, probably not want it to be introduced because obviously they would have. I don't think that goal would have been given otherwise. So, and then later on, Arsenal was still pushing forward, but Swansea very good at the back. You know, Fernandes at the back alongside Williams and Jazz Richards came on as well. He's been on loan at Fulham, wasn't he? Came back when his loan spell, did really well. He had a couple of good challenges late on, and Arsenal should have won that game. Yeah, I think Vegas said after the game, you know, 19 out of 20 times they win that game, but didn't win it on that occasion. And Swansea, you know, like I say, 5 wins out of the last 7, each of their last 3, and just absolutely flying. You look at the squad they've got, and is it really that good? I'm not too sure, but where they're on the table, brilliant.
Yeah, they've done fantastic. You know, it's been talked about a lot how good a job Gary Monk's done, and 56 points they've got this season. They had 42 points last season. It's already they've already broken their record for, you know, points in the Premier League, and certainly they can keep pushing on here. They've fancied their chances against City. I reckon Palace away in their last game. Palace have got one of the worst home records in the league. They've lost more games than anyone else at home, so they certainly fancied their chances in that last game. And I think the big thing for them now is they've got a real chance of getting into Europe. You know, it didn't look that way. You know, sort of about a month ago, it looked like the top 7 would be, you know, Southampton, Spurs, Liverpool, and then, you know, the top 4 above them. So, but the way it's gone recently, Spurs, they've won just one of their last 6 games, and you look at the table now, and Swansea sitting there in 8th. They're 1 point behind Southampton in 7th, and only 2 points behind Spurs in 6th. So you certainly you wonder, like, you look at Southampton and Swansea. I think both of those clubs, they'll want to get into Europe this season. Swansea, they've had Europe recently, you know, obviously after winning the League Cup back in, I think it was in 2012, 2013, whenever it was, and so they've had the taste of European football recently. I think they'll quite fancy getting themselves back in there now, especially. You know, it will certainly help them, I think, potentially to maybe sign some players this summer if they get into the Europa League. They'll certainly be spending money this summer, that's for sure, because, you know, they sold Bonnie in January and they didn't really spend any of that money, and, you know, they've done fantastically without him, because you would have said he was probably the only player in their squad who, you know, could probably be bought by a top 4 club. He was obviously against Man City here, who they play in this game, so it'll be interesting to see if Bonnie comes on and plays, you know, at his former stadium here for sure. But I think the European lure is certainly, it's a massive thing for them, because there's 56 points. I mean, Gary Monk, if they do get into the European places, he'll certainly be in with a chance of getting the Manager of the Year award. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Jose Mourinho. He hasn't won a single Manager of the Month award this season for Chelsea, but he'll probably, you know, win Manager of the Year for, you know, how solid Chelsea have looked, just how, you know, how dominant they've been all season long. But if Monk can get Swansea into the European places, you know, 7th should probably be good enough for Europe, because you'd expect Arsenal to win the cup final. If Villa win the cup final, then they need to get 6th, but they could finish 6th because they're only 2 points behind Spurs. So a fantastic job by Swansea, and that win at Arsenal was, you know, just one of their best results of the season.
Actually, they might have a bit of money to spend this summer, don't they, if they finish up there. And like you mentioned, the Bonnie, where they get 25-30 million from him, so you fancy, like I say, didn't spend too much of it, so they could have some money to spend this summer. Moving on to Manchester City, obviously when they lost at Manchester United, there was talk of whether they're going to finish in the top 4. You know, it was obviously massively doom and gloom. Won all 4 games since then, the last of which at the last time out was against QPR, and QPR were, you know, to put it kindly, they were dreadful, weren't they? You know, they absolutely, I think it was early on, Aguero scored the first of his 3 goals, and top scorer in the league obviously now, and had his injury problems, but I read a strange thing about, he said that he's given up meat. You know, he had a meeting with his nutritionist, he's given up meat, he's turned vegetarian, which has helped him in his recent form. You know, it's quite interesting to hear that from a player, you know, professional footballer, when you're looking to build, you know, maybe a bit of power, giving up meat. But anyway, the game itself was, was impressive from City. You know, QPR were bad, but to win 6-0 in any game, especially in the Premier League, you know how competitive it was. And I think it's just so important to, obviously they had a couple of games in there. They beat Villa at home, didn't they? Where they were very close to drawing, or might even lost that game. Won that one, had a couple of good wins since. Beat West Brom, obviously beat QPR last time out, and that's left them in a decent position in the table. Like you're going to mention, they're favourites to finish second now, but overall, has it been a great season? You can't really say it's been a great season. They've given up their title and they're quite far away, 13 points behind Chelsea or something. But you know, last time out, decent. If they can win their last couple of games, in, you know, we've got Southampton at home last game of the season, so decent.
I think they'll want to finish second now. I mean, given Swansea's win over Arsenal, City now probably favourites to finish second because they're 3 points clear of Arsenal. We do have a game in hand, but in terms of the goal difference, you know, they've got a decent gap on the goal margin. So I mean, if Arsenal win that game in hand, you know, City, they'll still need to win, you know, their last two probably to get second, because you fancy Arsenal win their last 3 games they've got now. But so you look at the table, like you say, I think they're 11 points behind Chelsea. It is, so you know, considering they did win the league last year, you know, that is too big a gap, you know, to give up. You know, considering they were champions last year, you know, certainly some of the things haven't gone right. You know, Yaya Toure, you know, he's certainly dipped a lot. I mean, Aguero's still, you know, one of the probably the best striker in the league. You'd say Sergio Aguero. And proving that as he is top of the scoring charts after that impressive hat-trick. But you know, there's talk, I saw a rumour last night that Yaya Toure could be off to Inter Milan, and if they lose him, you know, certainly the talk this summer is that they'll certainly maybe need a big squad rebuild. You know, certainly maybe the first big rebuild in about 5 years. They might need, you know, there's certainly players in each position, you'd say, out wide, in the middle, up front, in defence. You know, there's certainly, I mean, goalkeepers, they're fine, Joe Hart's a good keeper, but elsewhere, I think they need a big rebuild this summer. Will Pellegrini stay? It'd be interesting to see, but certainly I think the summer ahead is going to be very, very interesting for them. We'll see how much that money they throw about. You know, there's the financial fair play thing. You know, they've struggled with that. They've had that, you know, they had that big fine in Europe as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this summer.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Pellegrini. I think they probably will stick with him. You talk about Pep Guardiola, who's come out again and said, you know, I'm not leaving. Got a contract obviously next season, and obviously Bayern Munich going out the Champions League to Barcelona quite comfortably, but you fancy he'll stay. You fancy he's still got a job to do there. Obviously they've won the Bundesliga, which Bayern expect to do, don't they? It's a massive surprise if they don't, but Champions League, you fancy he might have another crack at it next season, Guardiola, and then eventually come to the Premier League. But you listen to a lot of journalists in Spain, and they always talk about Guardiola, you know, wants to come to Manchester United. He likes the history of clubs, and that's no disrespect to City, but they haven't got the history of Manchester United, and that's a fact. You know, that's the way it is. But it'll be interesting to see what that happens. You look around at other managers, there's plenty of talented coaches in Europe, but is there anyone enough? I mean, you look at Pellegrini, the job he did at Villarreal and Malaga, you know, he's a good coach, you know, he looks a little out of his depth at times possibly, but like I say, big summer. I mean, it's been talk of Paul Pogba maybe going there to replace Toure. That'd obviously be a direct replacement, same type of player, you know, very powerful in midfield, you know, likes a goal from midfield, so it'd be interesting. I'd say tough game to go to Swansea though, be keen to finish the season on a high, and if they do finish second, then it's certainly not been a poor season, but you know, it'd be a little bit better than it looked a few weeks ago.
Certainly, I think it's a big game for both clubs. You know, they both sort of got their little mini battles. Obviously, City want to finish second, Swansea now with a real chance of getting those European places. So it is quite an interesting game. What's your score prediction?
I actually fancy Swansea to get a point out of this one. Yeah, I mean, you look at Swansea, they've been a good season, but you look at the games they've lost this season. They lost to Spurs, Chelsea, and Liverpool at home. The last 3 home defeats. So against the bigger, better teams in the league, they have maybe. I mean, they got thumped at home by Chelsea. It was at 5-0, you know, a few months ago. So it'd be interesting to see how they get on this one. I fancy them to get a point. I'm going to go 1-1.
Yeah, I think that's that. Like you mentioned, they're losing to the big teams at home. I think that could just play a factor here, and I think City, just with their overall quality, I think they might just edge it. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 City win. So, but 1 draw and an away win. Thanks for watching.